Here we have the 2025 Toyota 4Runner. This is the TRD Off-Road Premium. Very controversial new car. That's almost an understatement if you look at any YouTube, TikTok, Instagram comment section about this vehicle. Now, this is actually my personal 4Runner. I bought this not too long ago and wanted to make a video detailing the initial ownership and just a general review from an owner's perspective. Let's go ahead and first start with the styling of the new 4Runner. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen it online, but honestly, I really would encourage everyone to go try to see one in person if you haven't already, because in person, I think it's one of the best looking new SUVs on the market. The size profile is really a good sweet spot in my opinion. It's not too big compared to all the other stuff out there, and it's big enough to where you actually have a lot of practicality with the cargo area. So just going a few details about mine in particular. So it is black, as you can see, is fitted with the standard 18-inch TRD wheels. And if you haven't already noticed, this is a non-hybrid variant. If it was a hybrid, you would see an iForce Max badge. So this is just the regular 2.4 liter gas only motor. This is that new power plant right here. So this is the 2.4 liter 4-cylinder T24A FTS. So yes, it is a four-cylinder. It is turbocharged, but overall, I don't think it's worthy of a lot of the online commenter hate that it has been getting. Talk to anyone who's driven one of these, and they will tell you it's a lot more potent than you would think. Obviously, there is a stigma just with everything going down to smaller displacement, less cylinders, forced induction, all of that, and I get it. I love big naturally aspirated motors, but with this use case, I really have come to just really appreciate this motor so far, and I have good faith that with regular maintenance and frequent oil changes, that this motor will do me good for a long time. It really just has a great feel, and it feels really durable, and I really love it so far. This in the gas only variant, not the hybrid variant, 278 horsepower, 317 foot-pounds of torque. Now with that torque, the big deal about that is you're getting it at only 1700 RPM. So this motor is really punchy, and it will get going from a stop. That 0 to 30, which I think is one of the most, metrics that's not really used enough and not talked about by, the general community, I guess you could say, because that's really what's important when you're driving around town and you're just getting from stoplight to stoplight. How does it feel just getting up to speed from a stop? And it feels good. It definitely has good punch. The best way I would describe it, which other reviewers have described it similarly as well, is like a diesel, like a little turbo diesel motor. That is probably the best description anyone has made. I've owned a lot of diesels before. It makes me think of my old Audi A3 TDI. It really feels similar to that motor, and that's a compliment. It just feels punchy, athletic, at least from a stop. And even on the higher end, for passing on the freeway, I've never had any issue with this. And compared to something like a 5th gen, that 4-liter V6 was really, a bulletproof, really an awesome motor. But I would have to say, The passing power with this, the punch from a stop, and the added efficiency, this is really, it's really a good upgrade. I hate to say it, you know, it really is. Now that we got some of that initial technical stuff out of the way, this is a part where I really just want to go into talking about what it's like driving the vehicle, what it's just really been like to own it so far. You know, I haven't owned it for very long. It's only been maybe 3-4 weeks, but it's just been a really pleasant ownership experience so far. And what I mean by that is, you know, I'm really excited to drive this every day. I'm really excited to get in it. It just is fun. It fits all my needs, and I think a lot of other people would probably be on the same page, you know, if you actually drive it. Originally, I had, in my new car search, I had really written this new 4Runner off. I just maybe saw a couple, or maybe I fell a victim to just that initial group think of 4-cylinder equals bad. You know, on the surface, it seemed like it would just be kind of an underpowered, weak, turbo laggy type of offering that a lot of the new stuff is nowadays, to be fair. But it wasn't until I watched a couple reviews and really started doing more research that I realized, hey, I should probably give this a look and take a test drive. And I'm really glad that I did. Going into the interior a little more here, just take a look at this cargo area. I mean, it's really good. And I'm coming from a full-size pickup, and this cargo area is more than adequate, especially it not being the hybrid. We do get a lower load floor, as I'm sure everyone has pretty much seen by now. But if you do get the iForce Max hybrid, your load floor is going to be about maybe 5 inches taller than this. And for me, that was probably enough for it to sway my decision to go with the gas. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the driving portion, but I really just, you know, appreciate having that extra cargo room, and love these mats, by the way. Also on the backrest too. It just feels really solid back here, and it's a very tall area. So if you have something, you know, like a big dog crate or just maybe furniture that you're moving, this is really really a good solution just for all that stuff. I mean, it's I have no complaints. I think it's great. And obviously the best part about it is the rear window does slide down in typical 4Runner fashion. So I won't bother showing that to you guys because I'm sure everyone has seen that. But it's an awesome feature. It really is. And this being the off-road premium, you do get the power liftgate. Now we started kind of backwards there, but let's move our way up to the back seat. And not really much to say about the back seat. You know, I'd probably have to say this is not the worst part about the car, because it really isn't that bad, but you know, maybe something to consider if you are taking around a lot of passengers, car seats. You know, you can make car seats work in here. Is it going to be as big as, you know, a full-size SUV like a Tahoe or a Sequoia? Absolutely not. It is quite a bit smaller back here. And, you know, that's kind of the case with a lot of these off-roaders nowadays. Even I did own a Land Cruiser 200 series, and, you know, it just happens to kind of be the way it is with some of these off-roaders. The back seat tends to kind of get compromised just a little bit compared to minivans, crossovers, and, you know, the big Suburbans and all that stuff. But, you know, it's fine. I have no complaints. You know, this is me at 6 feet. I can sit behind myself and it's okay. My knees will probably touch the back, but, you know, overall, it's fine. It really is fine back here. The seats are a little bit stiff in the back. They're not quite as plush as the front seats, but, you know, I'm not sitting back here. I don't really mind. My passengers haven't complained, so I think we're good. Now, moving into the cockpit area. So probably the most important part. So, you know, I see a lot of people online complaining about these hard plastics, and I get that. For me personally, it really doesn't bother me. If anything, it just makes it feel a little more rugged in a sense. Mainly just because, you know, I've owned all sorts of vehicles, and interiors do get damaged, and, you know, wear and tear is definitely a real thing. But with this, it really seems like, you know, I could see in 10 years this looking exactly the same as how it does now. And for me, this is not, at least it's not a touch point, at least for me. Maybe some people put their elbow up here. I don't. I put my elbow down here generally, and this is soft touch and it feels great. I really like these door handles personally. They are plastic, yes, but they're not going to get hot. You know, I've owned other vehicles where, you know, you have some fancy anodized aluminum or what have you, and it'll just get, you know, scorching hot. Window switches, everything like that. It's totally serviceable, you know. I really do like this interior, and going into more detail. So this being the off-road premium, we do have the Softex interior, and these seats are really great. You know, I like them. I'm very picky about seats. The gripe I will say that I have with these is that if you have any sort of crumbs, you know, maybe if you're eating a Snickers bar or anything, you know, some sort of thing with nuts and little tiny crumbs, these perforations are pretty big, and they can get inside of these, and they can get inside the perforations pretty easily and just kind of get stuck in there. And you know, I will admit I've taken some tweezers and just kind of been plucking things out. Really was only an issue like one time, and hasn't really happened since, but that's something to consider. I wish they would maybe do something with the perforations, maybe not so big. You can kind of get a better idea here. I mean, stuff just kind of gets in there, and that kind of irks me. But other than that, these seats, definitely good. Moving to the interior. So, one thing I would like to say is that this interior looks very familiar to me. No, I did not have a Tacoma, but I did have the newest generation of Tundra. And, you know, this screen, this steering wheel, this is all familiar territory for me, and just a lot of the, you know, aesthetic and everything like that. But I will say this feels totally different. And you may have seen other people talk about this in other reviews as well, but it's true. There's something different about these Toyotas that are made in Japan versus some of these. You know, I haven't really spent much time in the Tacoma, but I'm assuming it's the same thing, at least from what I've seen in reviews. These Japanese interiors, they're solid. They're tight. Everything feels, I mean, this feels really, I wouldn't necessarily say high-end or luxury. That's not really my point, but solid. Everything is solid. It feels like it's, you know, been cranked together a little bit harder. You know, in the Tundra, there was more rattles. I know in the Tacoma, people talk a lot about rattles. Yes, this is maybe a little bit loose. I know everybody, you know, when they make videos about these, always with the glove box, but, you know, that doesn't rattle when you're driving. But everything else, it just feels well put together. And, you know, there probably is something to say about, you know, what they're doing in Japan and in those facilities. But it feels solid. You know, I really have to appreciate that. Same with the 250 Land Cruiser as well. I've spent some time in those. Those feel really solid as well. So if you're comparing this to a Tacoma, maybe you own a Tacoma, or maybe you've driven a Tacoma or a newer Tundra, go ahead and try one of these out, because you'd be surprised. I know those interiors, at least in my Tundra, you know, the volume knob, or in the Tundra, it's up here, but that volume knob fell off within a week of owning it, and Toyota didn't even have a fix for it. I had to order a special 3D printed one that would actually stay on there. So little things like that. The Tundra has a lot of little things like that really bug me, and I'm pretty sure the Tacoma has its own little similar issues like that. But this is really solid. I really love this interior. Now, just talking about some of the, you know, aesthetic and usability of the interior, quality aside, I really love just how simple it is. I mean, you have your temperature right here, and you got your fan speed right here. Heated, cooled, heated steering. You know, you have your recirc, your modes, AC on off. I mean, it's just easy. And, you know, I would say compared to a lot of the other stuff out there, you know, I really like the new GX, to be honest. I think the new GX looks really cool, looks awesome, but I don't think I could really live with it every day because of, I mean, I'd have to spend some time in it and really see, but just off the bat, I prefer something like this. If you haven't seen the GX, a lot of it is integrated, all the climate is integrated into the infotainment system. This is just, you know, brain dead, simple, just, you know, volume knob, temperature, fan, buttons. And these buttons, they feel good, you know, they just feel solid, easy to use. And that continues down here. So this shifter, it's just simple, you know, PRND, just a simple shifter. It feels great too. In the Tundra, you know, just bringing up the Tundra one more time, and probably in the Tacoma as well. It has a lot of play. The Tundra had a lot of play in the shifter. I remember really just not enjoying that shifter. Not that it's that big of a deal, but in this feels really solid. You know, I actually kind of quite enjoy just shifting it into drive. I mean, it's satisfying, you know, for whatever reason. Now, going down to here, so obviously this being a TRD, you know, it does come standard with the four-wheel drive system. So we have our 2 high, 4 low. We have our drive mode selector here. And then another great just function of the interior is just having that camera view right here. That's just really nice to have. Now let's go ahead and start it up. Very familiar sounds if you've ever spent time in any newer Toyotas. So yes, I do have a malfunction there for the TPMS sensors. I need to take that to the dealer because that's something that shouldn't be there. I mean, it's so minor, I haven't even really bothered to make a big deal out of it yet, but you know, I'll get that taken care of. Now moving on. So another option that my TRD Off-Road Premium does have is I believe it's in the Tow Tech package where you get the digital rear view mirror. And I really love these. You know, I've had them in different vehicles before. They're just really nice to have. I know some people, you know, I have a friend who literally, you know, bought a truck and, you know, picked out one that specifically had this rear view mirror, the digital one. And he, you know, spent the extra money for it. And then he realized he hated it and then he just turned it off. So he doesn't even drive around with it. So, but for me, I really like it. I think it's a great feature. I think it should be on more cars, especially SUVs, because when you have people back there or cargo, you know, you can't really see too well. So it's just a great, you know, feature to have. Another option, the only other option I believe that mine has is the moonroof. It's nice. You know, I can kind of have it or not have it. I'm not really huge on moonroofs because it does eat into your headroom just a little bit, but overall, you know, why not? It's nice to have. Now you will see there, I do have the Garmin Dashcam Mini. It's making noises. Now you might be wondering, how is that hooked up? Well, there is a small adapter that I got just on Amazon. It's kind of just like a piggyback little adapter that takes power from the mirror and just, you know, feeds it out to a little USB-C. And I kind of had it, sorry, trying to get an angle there, but I had it tucked away, and then it just feeds out the side there, and that's how I got power for Dashcam. So that's a really nice solution. You know, it's always nice when you don't have to get up into the headliner and run it down, you know, even though, yeah, you could do that, but you know, having something like this is just really simple. Now going more in depth into the interior, you may have noticed this thing as well. So this is just a little aftermarket accessory that I got, and I really love it. I mean, essentially it's just a little clamp that clamps on here. Works on Tacomas or 4Runners, but really simple. This is MagSafe, so it'll just hook up, click onto your phone, and you can have it there mounted. And then, you know, you got your fast charging USB-Cs right here. I just got a little coiled cable so I can charge my devices when I need. And then you do have the wireless charger there. Doesn't really work for me, if I'm being honest. Maybe it's because I have the newer phone and the camera sticks out a little bit, so it doesn't really get good contact. Either way, I know there's some accessories you can buy that make it a little more
that just make it a little bit easier to use. Basically, it's a little, it's an extra thing that sticks on top of it, and then you just plug it into here. And it's supposed to be just a better solution than the OEM ones, because I've had that a lot. It's not just Toyota. A lot of these OEM wireless charging pads on new vehicles, they don't seem to work very well, and your phone can overheat when it's on there. So if that's something that you're evaluating with trim levels, by the way, I know one of the salesperson was telling me, oh, you got to upgrade to the TRD off-road because you get the wireless charger. Oh, I really didn't care about that, and neither should you. It's really not worth upgrading if that's the only thing you're upgrading for. Now let's go into just some storage, just other aspects of the interior. So storage is great. You do have the storage up here. You do have your glove box there, and it's reasonably sized. You have a, door pocket for, 2 door pockets, one at the bottom and one in the middle there. And going in here, you do have this little pocket that you can, stick a phone or stick whatever else in. And then going into the center console. Now, if you're coming from a full-size truck, this might be a little disappointing, but it's fine. You can keep your basics in there, some cash, some whatever in there. It's totally workable. So now let's go into the infotainment. So this is probably a good time to talk about some of the trim levels and some of the differences. So I won't bore you with it too much, because if you're watching this, you've probably seen other videos and you've probably been on Toyota.com and explored and kind of gotten an idea of some of the differences. But so starting with the SR5, and that's what I originally was going to get, was an SR5. I really liked just the simplicity of it, and of course the price, which is a huge factor. But with the SR5, you're going to be getting just the more basic instrument cluster, which is totally fine. To me, I don't care either way. But this being the TRD Off-Road Premium, you do get the digital instrument cluster, and I believe every other model besides the SR5 has the digital, fully digital instrument cluster. So, but it works fine. We can go kind of into here, MPGs, and you can customize it however you want. It's, if you've watched other videos on newer Toyotas, you'll know that people complain about it being kind of difficult to work with, and yeah, that is kind of true. But it's fine. Once you get it set up, it works. Now going into the infotainment, so this being the off-road premium, like I said, if you get the TRD Sport Premium or off-road premium, anything with a premium basically, or a limited, platinum, Trailhunter, and of course TRD Pro, you will get the bigger screen. I don't know I think it's a 12 or 13 inch, might even be 14 inch. I'm not sure, but it's big. That's all you need to know. And some people maybe prefer the smaller one. I'm kind of indifferent. I have the same screen on my Tundra, and I'm used to it. I like it. I don't mind it. I think it's great. It's very easy to use. You just pop through your settings, and it's just simple. It works. And one thing I do like is, having this camera button here, we can just throw that on. And that's not what I'm trying to do specifically, but how do I do this? Anyways, generally, I think if you're in park, it just gives you that 360 thing. But when you're pulling up, trying to center yourself in a parking spot or whatever, you can just press that button, and the resolution is really good with the backup camera. So as you can see, having that big screen does make it a little bit easier to see your parking lines, whatever. But this being a pretty small vehicle anyway, you don't really need a 360 camera regardless. And yes, that does go into the one of the other options that you do get when you upgrade is you do get the 360 camera. It's a nice thing to have. Do you need it in a vehicle this size? No, you really don't. You could be totally fine with just having the regular backup camera that's in the anything below the Sport Premium or Off-Road Premium. Okay, so I think it's about time we take it for a drive and continue this conversation on the road. So let's go ahead. Now, the biggest thing, and I think if you anyone's initial impression when they first get behind the wheel and drive this new 4Runner is just going to be how light the steering is. It's really light. Obviously, when you switch to an electronic system, that's kind of what you'd expect, but it's really nice. I really enjoy it. You know, it's just really easy to maneuver and just get around. You know, I've driven stuff with heavier steering, and obviously, like I said, you know, owning a Land Cruiser 200 series, the steering on that is not super heavy, but it can get just a little annoying after a while, you know, or, you know, especially, you know, if you're used to driving older trucks. You know, I've driven a lot of older trucks, and this is just nice. It's really easy to maneuver around, you know, it's just simple, and mainly that just maneuverability around the city. That's been the nicest part. Now, going into the next, we do have an ambulance coming, so I'm going to slow down. Let's just talk about how quiet it is. You know, it's probably not easy to pick up on camera, but this acoustic glass and the rake of the windshield really makes it a pretty comfortable, quiet place to be. It's a really windy day out there, so you might hear a little bit of wind coming through, but barely, really. I mean, just it's just like pretty darn quiet in here. And, you know, even taking it out at first with my wife, you know, that was one of the first things she noticed as well. It's just quiet, you know, and you don't get a lot of road noise. Obviously, that's probably going to depend on your tires and whatnot, but, you know, road noise is pretty minimal. It's just pretty comfortable in here. It's really just, it's not what you would expect from an off-road vehicle or body on frame truck. You know, obviously everything has gotten so insulated nowadays. You know, driving a lot of the newer trucks, you know, everything kind of feels like this, but it's just nice to see that, you know, the more, or what used to be more basic, you know, 4Runners, this is kind of how it is now. You know, they've caught up to everyone else, and this is quiet. And I've seen in other reviews people talking about it, you know, it driving almost similar to a crossover, and yes, that is true. You know, it's kind of depends on what you're used to driving, but if you drive one of these, it probably won't feel much different than a car, you know, more regular sedan, a front wheel drive crossover, just anything like that. I mean, best way to describe it is just kind of normal and easy. I mean, there's really not much to it. But what you do get, and you might not get in other vehicles, you know, like a crossover or sedan, is you do get a feeling of solidity just driving down the road. You know, I took my brother out on it a couple days ago, and one of the first things he said was that, you know, it has a tank-like feeling. And yeah, it kind of does. I mean, maybe not so much. We do have a nice GX there. But it does kind of have a tank-like quality. It does feel solid. Now, does it feel as solid as, I don't know, maybe a Raptor, or maybe, you know, probably, I'm sure I haven't driven the newest 300 series LX, but does it feel as solid as that and as tank-like as that? Probably not. You know, G-Wagon, let's just go ahead and say, no, probably not. It doesn't have that same, you know, bank vault-like feeling, but it does have definitely a solidity that is nice. And, you know, like I was talking about earlier, I think that is, you know, partially in part to it being made in Japan, and just, you know, maybe a higher quality standard there, higher build quality. That's not to say that the ones in the US are not reliable or not built well, but that's just kind of my own experience having owned both, you know, a newer Tundra and one of these. This just feels like it's built better. It's built more solidly. Now, getting into sort of what it's like to drive, and just, you know, talking more about the performance. So, you know, we can kind of get into it a little bit here. Now, on camera, that's not really going to look like anything. You're just going to, you know, think, wow, that was not very exciting. And yeah, it wasn't really, but, you know, what you didn't feel was that punch. That can't really translate through the camera, but it does have a nice gutsy low-end punch to it. And going back to what I was talking about earlier, you know, it does really feel like a diesel. You know, I've owned lots of diesels. You know, even I've owned a newer newer Land Rover diesel, that 3-liter diesel that they've had, that discontinued now. It feels similar to that, you know. It feels similar to the Audi diesel I've owned in the past. It just feels kind of like just punchy. And the top end, yeah, there's not much at the top end. There really isn't. But that's not really what I'm looking for in a 4Runner. I want a motor that's going to feel, you know, like it has some punch and get me off the line. And especially if you're off-roading and you need that torque down low, this is more than adequate for all of that. And something I'm even thinking of doing down the line is doing a tune on it, because that's kind of part of the fun of having a turbo vehicle is, you know, if you want to, there's always more potential. Get a tune. And that's something I might do down the line. I don't know. I'm kind of evaluating it. But, you know, that's one way to probably easily get an extra 50 horsepower or more. I'm not really quite sure. But regardless, in stock form, it feels great. And, you know, let's talk a little bit more about why, you know, what are the other benefits of this over, you know, a naturally aspirated, you know, big displacement V6 like we had before, a big 4-liter V6. It would just have to be the fuel economy. Now, I'm kind of still in break-in period, so I haven't gotten the best, maybe the best data for, you know, fuel economy. But right off the bat, let's just go ahead and look. And unfortunately, I accidentally reset my fuel economy gauge recently. So, but yeah, 18.6. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of city driving. This is probably just in the last like 100 miles, I think, was when it was last reset. But when I was doing a little more highway driving and a little more mixed use, it was probably closer to 20. And I'm pretty confident that once this engine breaks in and maybe I do start doing a little bit more highway driving, that it will be pretty easy for me to get, you know, average in the 20s pretty consistently. That seems like across the board, that seems like what most people are doing. Now, going into that next point, let me just make this turn here. Okay, so going into that next point, which is, of course, gas or hybrid. So as I mentioned before, this is the gas variant. And, you know, this might be a good time to just give it another punch. Why not while the road is wide open? Yeah, gas versus hybrid. So I drove the hybrid, I did. And one thing I will say about the hybrid is that, I mean, if you don't know the specs, right off the bat, you know, you're getting a lot more torque, which is nice. Especially, I just did this whole swan song about, you know, how great the torque is in this one. Well, yeah, if you go to the hybrid, it'll be even more. I don't know if swan song is the right word for that, but yes, you will be getting even more torque, and it's awesome. And yes, I did drive that hybrid, but to be honest, I didn't really feel like it was that much of a difference compared to this. I've heard other people say completely the opposite, where they say, I don't even know how you get the gas when the hybrid exists. But for me, I didn't really notice that much of a difference. And the biggest drawback of the hybrid, in my opinion, is just you lose that cargo space. And with that higher load floor, to me, I was kind of all in on the gas version. I was like, you know, why I don't really feel that much of a difference in the power, and I'm going to lose out on that cargo, and generally it's going to be a little more expensive. I mean, I've seen some dealers where sometimes the hybrids have a little more discounts on them for whatever reason. It probably depends on your region, but yeah, I was just, you know, and also big thing too, the hybrid does weigh a good chunk more. I mean, not a huge amount, but probably about 400 pounds, I believe. And, you know, the gas version, oh, there's another 6th gen right there. Hi. Another TRD off-road. Wow. Okay. In underground. It's a cool color. So the gas version weighs about 4,850 pounds. That's the TRD off-road. And if you get the hybrid, it's about 400 pounds on top of that, maybe 450, something like that. But that's a noticeable chunk. I mean, that's, you know, maybe 8% more weight, something like that. And, You do feel it. I will say you do feel it when you drive it. It does feel heavier. You got all those batteries, all that battery weight, and it does feel heavier. I don't know how to describe it, but the gas version, you know, it does feel pretty light on its feet, and I haven't really gotten into the handling and that and you know, talking about that so much, but this car does handle very well, and you know, like I was talking about earlier, you know, it driving more like a crossover, yada yada yada. The hybrid, you retain all of those benefits, but it just feels it feels a little chunkier. Now, I've read that some people prefer that. I've, you know, reading on the forums and reading and watching some reviews, some people have even mentioned that they liked the hybrid because it felt a little more heavy and solid and sturdy. I didn't really have that same feeling as far as, you know, the heaviness being a benefit. I preferred the more light on its feet character that this gas only variant has. Now, obviously, the biggest thing you might be thinking is, well, what about the gas mileage? You know, shouldn't the hybrid be a lot better on gas? And the short answer is not really, no. I mean, if you look on Fuely.com and some of those other MPG tracking, you know, resources, if you look around, there's really no benefit, at least not that I could see. And just kind of comparing notes with people on forums and kind of looking at some of the data points, it really doesn't seem like anybody's getting better gas mileage with the hybrid versus the gas. And obviously there's so many variables like tires and whatnot, but you know, if we're just keeping it stock to stock, I don't really think there's much of a difference. I would, you know, from the manufacturer, Toyota does say that I think the highway is the same, but in the city you're getting an extra 3 miles per gallon. So combined, I think you're getting an extra 2 miles per gallon, something like that. But in the real world, I just don't think it really equates to that. But that's obviously really going to depend on your driving. And because I do so much city driving, it might have even been better for me to get the hybrid for my fuel economy. But just due to those reasons, like the cargo space, it just I wasn't really crazy about it. And, you know, like Toyota does mention that, you know, with this hybrid and wow, we're seeing a lot of, there is a 250 Land Cruiser. It's like, I never see any of these cars around, but I've already seen another 6th gen 4Runner. I saw the new GX, and now I just saw a 250 Land Cruiser. So we're seeing everybody today. And what do you know? Another 5th gen 4Runner right there. So, anyways, like I was saying with that, you know, it might have made sense for me to go with the hybrid route, but you know, I'm really happy with the gas. You know, and especially if you're going to spend more money, and yeah, that's what I was talking about. Is that Toyota doesn't really consider these like hybrids for more fuel efficiency. You know, like in the RAV4, if you get the you know, gas or the hybrid version, the hybrid's of course going to have better gas mileage. But in the trucks, that's not really the case. You know, in the Tundra hybrid, and the Tacoma, obviously it's the same car as the 4Runner, the Tacoma and Tacoma hybrid. Those, it's all the same, you know, across the board, as far as these being powertrains that are for more power, not more efficiency. You know, I guess that's why they're, you know, you have the iForce powertrain and they call it the hybrid, the iForce Max, or, you know, I'm not really sure the whole Toyota engine naming philosophy. I remember the old 5.7 was also called the iForce. I don't know, I get confused. Another Tacoma. But anyways, give it a little punch here. Yeah, it's good. It gets off the line just fine. You know, it's really pleasant to drive. And I've been driving on, you know, like, we're gonna go back over another bridge here, and it is windy out, and this is just, you know, open waterway with wind flowing freely, and I really don't hear anything. You know, car's not shaking around. I think a lot of that is just due to these windows. You know, this acoustic glass really makes a difference. But obviously another huge, not huge, but, you know, another big difference between this and its counterparts in the Land Cruiser 250 and the new GX would be that this windshield it's not as an aggressive as a, it's more raked than the GX or the 250 Land Cruiser. Now, kind of going on to that topic, because that's kind of another thing I wanted to discuss, was, you know, why would you buy the 4Runner? Why wouldn't you get the GX, or why wouldn't you get the Land Cruiser? And obviously the first answer would just be, yeah, the 4Runner is cheaper. But really, kind of when you start looking at the prices, I don't know, the lines get really blurred, you know, because you have a base GX 550 premium, that's going to be around like 65, 67. I mean, assuming you could get one. I mean, I don't know what the inventory is like now, but I'm sure they're probably still very much in demand. But say you get one at sticker and it's, you know, 60, mid 60s, 67, something like that. You know, you're getting your base model GX, which comes pretty well equipped, you know, at least from what I've seen. You know, you get everything you need. It's probably going to come with the same equipment that, you know, is on this TRD Off-Road Premium and more, you know, definitely, because it is a Lexus and more of a luxury vehicle. And then you look at the Land Cruiser. So with the Land Cruiser, you know, you do start off in that 1958 trim, and that, I believe, is like high 50s. Wow, another Land, and speak of the devil, I mean, wow, another 250. So if we're kind of comparing apples to apples, you know, I think, I'm trying to remember what the name of the Land Cruiser 250 is. That, you know, there's a 1958, and then the trim above it, I want to say it's maybe the premium trim, or just the Land Cruiser, not 1958. I'm not sure, but those are going to run you well into the 60s for those luxury pointed Land Cruisers. I want to say, from what I've seen, you know, high 60s, something like that. And this TRD Off-Road Premium, really, pricing has kind of been like all over the place. It really depends on region for whatever. Obviously, if you're not familiar, in the Southeast Toyota is kind of its own separate distributor, company, entity, whatever you want to call it. And the pricing is a lot different. Not a lot different, but definitely different from, I think, the rest of the country, as far as I know. There's just a lot of port added accessories that come on all the cars in the Southeast. And thankfully, my car was not actually an originally, I don't think it was a Southeast Toyota car, because I didn't really get any. It's a bunch of stuff like door edge guards and you know, $200 for a phone cable charging pack. It's just a lot of junk. So sometimes they're more expensive in the Southeast. But just generally speaking, straight Toyota MSRP, these off-road premiums are about starting around 55, 56,000, and, you know, with a couple options from the factory, you know, like the moonroof and the digital rear view mirror, tow tech package. You know, I want to say the actual sticker on mine was probably closer to 57, 58. Now, that's not what I paid. For whatever reason, you know, I won't go into it too much, but these 4Runners just aren't as hot maybe as Toyota anticipated, because there's a lot of them on lots. You know, you go around, you look at maybe the days of supply, and there's a lot of them out there. Obviously, you know, I want to say the TRD Pro and maybe some of the higher trims, those are probably, maybe just because they're lower production, that they're just, you know, not really around as much. But, you know, those you don't see too frequently. I haven't really seen any on dealer lots, maybe one or two. But, you know, the general stuff like the SR5s, the TRD Sports, the TRD Off-Roads, that sort of stuff, Limiteds, they're everywhere. You know, you can pretty much go to any dealer and, you know, they're probably going to have 10 4Runners there. Bigger dealers might even have 40 of them. I don't know, but there's a lot of them around. And what that means, the point I'm trying to get at is that there's discounts to be had on these. And, you know, mine, I paid closer to, you know, I was more in the low 50s after the discounts that I received. And, you know, I did get a good trade-in value on what I was trading in. So I was happy with my deal. So, you know, would I have bought this car at, you know, full boat, 57, 58,000? No, probably not. It would have been a tough sell. I probably would have, you know, wanted to go a different route like the SR5. And that's what I was talking about in the beginning recently, how I originally wanted an SR5. The reason I originally wanted an SR5 was because of the massive price gap between trims. It's really wild on these 4Runners, how you have the SR5 that starts, you know, around 41,000, I think 43,000 for 4-wheel drive. And then you get to the next step up, you know, you get to TRD off-road and it's 50. You think, okay, well, it's an extra $7,000, but really for what? For a center locking diff, you know, the off-road, the Bilstein shocks, and I guess heated seats, maybe heated steering wheel. I'm not even sure if that's on the regular off-road. I think it is. I think you get the heated steering wheel as well. Digital instrument cluster, that's kind of it. Wireless charger. So 7,000 for that, I don't know. It's not really too enticing. On the previous 5th gen 4Runners, the pricing between trims was much more close matched. You know, you had your SR5. I want to say for like the 2024 model year, you know, your SR5 was 40 grand, and then your TRD off-road was like maybe 44, 45 grand, and then your off-road premium was 48, and then your TRD Pro was at the top of the trim levels was 56. So I'm seeing so many 4Runners. That's another one right there, and just saw one back there if you didn't see. Anyways, the point is, on these new ones, there's such a big gap between the pricing on the trims, and in going back into those, you know, the GX and the Land Cruiser 250, all those kind of factored together just makes it all really confusing. If you're looking at these cars, it's like you have to do all these mental gymnastics to think, okay, well, if I do the off-road premium, well, okay, I'm at $57,000. Hey, but a Land Cruiser, base Land Cruiser is 59. Well, why wouldn't I just do that? And well, this Land Cruisers, you know, the 1958s actually have more discounts, so they're actually more like 54 or 55. Well, I don't know. And then, you know, you have, oh, but what if I just did the GX for an extra 10 grand? So trust me, it's really complicated if you're wanting to get into this, into one of these vehicles, you know, just because obviously if you're buying a 4Runner, you're going to be cross-shopping a Land Cruiser, and you're probably going to be cross-shopping a GX, because why not? You know, it's all kind of the same. So at the end of the day, I think for me and for a lot of people, it just kind of comes down to like, what are the options you want, and what's the price you want to pay? For me, my max that I really wanted to pay was like, at least for the 4Runner, was like 50,000. You know, I just thought after 50,000, I was like, you know, I would probably rather explore other options at that point. I would probably look for a 1-year-old 250 Land Cruiser that, you know, I could get for in the 50s, mid 50s or whatever. So, you know, it just, like I said, it's all these, you know, mental gymnastics, and probably would help, honestly, if you're shopping and comparing trims, just do a spreadsheet. And one guy, she made a really good post, I think it was a spreadsheet as well, on just, you know, comparing all the pricing of the old 4Runner and the new 4Runner, and the price difference between trims, if that makes sense. And what I will say regarding that was that the new SR5 4Runner 6th gen 2025 is only like $400 or $500, maybe like $1,000 more than the 5th gen 4Runner SR5 2024. So as far as if you're just comparing it, and if you're just, you know, of the mindset that cars are so expensive now, all these new generations, everything is so expensive, well, you know, the SR5 is about the same price. The new SR5 is about the same price as the old SR5. So, but if you're talking about, you know, the TRD off-road premium and all that stuff, yeah, it's definitely a lot more expensive than the equivalent trim from before. Now, of course, a lot of people are, you know, do make the point that the new TRD off-road premium is kind of basically this year's, is like the old TRD Pro, just as far as equipment and just capability. The new TRD Pro is kind of a different beast all on its own. I mean, I haven't driven one, but you know, all the technology and all the off-road equipment on that is kind of in a league of its own. So I don't even think it really, I'd probably have to agree with the idea that really can't be compared to the old TRD Pro. And that's why, you know, people do get up in arms about, you know, the TRD Pro. Look at any TRD Pro video on YouTube or Instagram. Look at the comments. First comment, I guarantee you, is going to be, oh, 70,000 for a Toyota, 70,000 for a 4Runner, 70,000 for blah, 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 for 4-cylinder, whatever. That's what all the comments are going to be. But, you know, I think maybe it's a little unfair that, you know, this vehicle didn't really exist before. There wasn't really a 4Runner that was like that before. So the new TRD Off-Road Premium, I think, is probably a more fair comparison to the old TRD Pro in terms of, you know, pricing and equipment and all that. So if you look at it that way, it kind of makes a little more sense. Now, you know, I could keep talking for a while about, you know, all this stuff, and I'll kind of go into just making a couple more points. And I think, you know, after just owning this car for a bit now, I really enjoy it. There are certain things, certain qualities that this new 4Runner has that you can't really get in other vehicles. And I've looked, you know, I've really driven a lot of stuff and test driven a lot of stuff and just watched so much videos and done so much research, and nothing quite has a package just like this. You know, it's a pretty special car. And what I mean by that is just having this very simplistic interior. You know, this is one thing I just always miss, is just having those basic climate controls, you know, like I used to have in my old Subaru. You know, it's just basic. You know, I've spent time, and if you ever spent time in some of the new Mercedes, you know, totally different, you know, not a comparable vehicle, obviously, but just if you spent time in those types of vehicles, everything is done on the screen. Obviously, Tesla, same way. And I don't hate screens necessarily, but there's something that's just kind of annoying about it. At least to me, I just get kind of annoyed with having the screen do everything, because if there's ever a glitch, maybe it's just lagging, maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe the CPU got too hot or something. I'm not sure. Whatever it is, something happened, and for whatever reason that screen isn't responding at that moment in time. It's annoying. It just is. And that's something that basically can't really happen with a dial, you know. It's things like that make me really appreciate this new 4Runner. And, you know, yes, that probably goes the same as Tacoma, because it's basically, you know, the same. But the one thing that Tacoma doesn't have that this has is that extra build quality, like I was talking about before. And you know, driving something in 2025, a new car that is as simple as this, is also the looks. You know, I think it looks great. It looks just simple. It's not. I don't think it's over the top. I really don't. I think it's really right where it should be. And there's that Land Cruiser again. I don't know if that's the same one that we saw before. We were going to stop for this lady walking the dog, and continue with my train of thought. Yeah, I'm just really enjoying this 4Runner so far. It just really is a nice car to drive around. And, you know, one thing I just, at least in my honeymoon stage of this ownership, I just want to get in and put miles on it. I really want to do a road trip somewhere and just put highway miles on this thing. Unfortunately, I've really only gotten to do like city driving with it, which is not great. You know, obviously it's better for an engine to take it on the highway and just kind of let it clear its throat and stretch its legs. But, you know, drive around the city, whatever. But that's my point. I just, you know, I want to get out there and drive it. You know, I haven't had that feeling in a while, you know, with a new vehicle. This is just really pleasant. You know, it does remind me a lot of, you know, the Subarus I used to drive when I was younger, and just cars of yesteryear from a simpler time, you know, yes, there is this massive screen right here, but the screen doesn't really do anything with the car. All it controls is just the, you know, obviously the stereo and your music and your navigation and phone and just whatever stuff like that. But as far as anything mechanical with the car, you know, you have your 4-wheel drive selection down here by the shifter, and you know, you got your volume knob, AC controls down there. So if this screen just died right now, it wouldn't really matter. I could still control my AC, do everything I need to do in the vehicle. So yeah, it's just simple. I really like it. And touching back on some of those points, you know, about the steering, it just being really light, and just, you know, maybe some people prefer heavier steering, and yeah, I guess you could have that opinion, but it's not like this is so light to the point where it's like nauseatingly light where you don't feel anything. It's just kind of light enough to make it a little easier to maneuver around town, maneuver in parking lots. And one thing I will say too is that on the SR5, it's even lighter. And test drive an SR5 two-wheel drive, it's even lighter. I mean, I don't know, it's crazy. So, but the off-road premium is a nice, it's a nice, you know, middle ground as far as just steering feel and it being nice to drive. But yeah, SR5 two-wheel drive, I will say, it's pretty cool. I know two-wheel drives, you know, aren't generally popular in the 4Runner world, but you know, if you wanted to just get a bare bones, you know, maybe discounted to like just under 30 grand, like just under 40 grand, like 39 for a SR5 two-wheel drive, that's a nice package, you know. Hey, that's probably, if the budget was really constrained and that was like the most I could spend, I would be totally happy with that, you know. It's totally fine. And I guess going back to those trims, I think I talked about all the trims. I think that's pretty much all I have to say, really. Obviously, if you've watched it this far, you're probably really interested in the 4Runner. Otherwise, you would not be watching this far. And I will say that, you know, if you're thinking about it, definitely try to test drive a few trims, get a feel for what you like. I think the TRD off-road is a nice sweet spot, but honestly, the SR5 is kind of where it's at. It's really kind of all you need. If I didn't drive this car with my wife, you know, I might have an SR5 right now. You know, not knocking her or anything, but you know, she likes having, you know, some extra features, and she really liked the big screen, which I can't blame her for. I think it's cool too. But yeah, the SR5 is probably the sweet spot, honestly, unless you get a crazy deal on a higher trim. But I think that probably sums everything up. Yeah, these new 4Runners are pretty darn great, you know, can't deny. All right, so probably close this video out by doing one more acceleration for you guys. So we are starting rolling start, and we're just gonna give it a good punch. Man, it's quick. I don't know. I think it's quick. Feels punchy, feels good. Anyways, guys, appreciate you guys watching. If you do have any questions, drop in the comments. I'll be reading comments and trying to answer, you know, any questions that anybody might have. So just drop a comment, and I'll probably be making some more videos on this 4Runner. I don't see why not. You know, I have done a couple little modifications that I may or may not have spoken about earlier, but I might make some videos on that. So anyways, guys, any questions, feel free to drop a comment and I'll be sure to answer them. And I hope you guys have a nice day. I'll be signing off now. Thanks for watching.